Hey everyone, Wanderbot here, and welcome back to the Cookie Cast. So, the last couple of topics have gotten a little heavy, and I've kind of noodled my way around some things that, honestly, frankly, somebody called me out on this for coming off like I'm going through a midlife crisis, and I think I am. I really, truly do think I am. And just a lot of things talking about, kind of where my channel is at with Shell and Private, things I want to do in the future, various goals and aspirations. Potentially moving across the country again in a couple of months. And just trying to switch things up so I stay healthier, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. And so as part of that, I guess today I kind of want to talk about food. Because I think food is my demon. To some degree, I realize that's a weird way to put it, but food for me is an adventure. It's something to look forward to, and also it's a vice that I should probably, oh boy. Promising Fate. I don't remember what that does. That's what that does. Okay, we are now making 8 billion cookies per second. Obviously, that's going to drop off pretty quick. But let's absorb 1 trillion cookies while we have the opportunity to do so. Anyway, do I want to get that temple upgrade? I think I'm just going to try and get as much as I can. No? What does this do? Alchemy labs are twice as effective, temples are twice as effective. I mean, yeah, let's grab that. Not as big as I was hoping it would be, to be honest, but still, it's a thing, it's a boost. So, we're talking food. Food is my vice. It's one of my, main creature comforts. Is that the right word? I'm not entirely sure. But, after a long day of work or whatever, I usually am looking forward to a nice meal. And I will definitely chow down more than I should, especially on days that I'm not feeling great. So if I'm feeling stressed, if I'm feeling tired, if my voice hurts, I will potentially eat more because it makes me feel better. Which is, it's true. Food is actually usually packed with effectively endorphins, fake and otherwise. I'm not entirely sure on the chemistry of it, but the eating like a McDonald's burger has as many endorphins as naughty activities, according to at least hearsay that I've heard. And I'm going to parrot it just because it supports my current narrative, and I will be more than willing to accept that I'm actually quite wrong if that's not the case. But, I keep hearing it, so I'll just parrot it for today. But, the idea that food is actually this thing that, obviously everybody eats, everybody has to eat, but it's kind of an addiction. Especially if you're not very good at managing it, or if you just are stressed and you just eat a lot as a result of it. I think that's always been me. If I'm having a bad day, I will just crack open a package of cookies and just eat way more than I should. Or, if I'm out and about and I go past the bubble tea place that I really like, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to drink the bubble tea and then just be like, I really hope I don't, gain weight as a result of this vice. And the answer is I'm okay at managing it, but it hasn't been that easy. It's always one of those where you have to kind of, I'm not going to say stare the monster in the face and recognize what it does to me, but I can't say that I have the healthiest coping mechanisms in regards to consumption and food and whatnot. I guess I can close the grimoire because that's not going to help me for a while. Oh, right. I should probably mention I got some sugar lumps. So we have a garden. Really, we're just waiting for these empty tiles to pop. I don't actually know how much I care. They reproduce. Will drop a seed when harvested. Decays in about... Oh. Wait, I gotta read this for a second. What does harvesting do? So harvesting, I think, gets me seeds, yeah? Oh, but it also gives me fertilizer. could do that. 'Cause what's dirt? Oh, tick every 15 minutes. Okay, I don't necessarily... Oh, I see. So that probably makes it so my plants harvest slower. But have a greater overall effect. I think that's how it works. Okay, cool. So we're talking about food. Obviously, kind of acknowledge that food is kind of... I'm not going to say dangerous. It is. I think food is absolutely dangerous. I mean, if you've ever looked at obesity statistics in the US, there's a very high correlation with, honestly, the stuff that we eat and our vices and, you know, the obesity. I'm going to call it a bit of an epidemic because, boy, you know, we were a lot thinner years and years ago, and that's especially dangerous in times of, well, I mean, COVID. COVID definitely makes it a lot spookier to be extremely overweight or to have generally, you know, weight-related health issues. And so that's something I kind of stare at a little bit. I promised myself I was going to be much more positive about this, and I'm immediately thinking about the negative. So let's talk about food in a more positive sense. You know, once we've kind of acknowledged that, yeah, it can be unhealthy, what is... You know, what's some cool things about food? So, I guess I might as well start at the beginning. It's weird to say start at the beginning. Yeah. Okay, so it's 7 ticks. Ah, I'll be able to change away from dirt. We got some baker's wheat and baker's wheat. I'm just gonna harvest those, because we don't care about more wheat. I know I can get new seeds. Crossbreed plants by planting them close to each other. Unlock new seeds by harvesting mature plants. So yeah, we want to find some new seeds of some variety. Unfortunately, it's going to take a while before these even mature, so I'll have to keep an eye on them. Anyway, so for me, for food was always kind of one of those oddity things. You know, mostly you just ate for the sake of eating. My mother made good food. She was a good cook and did a decent job, I mean, obviously, of keeping the family fed. My dad, not so much so. We would, we almost kind of banned my dad from cooking rice. Rice especially. Because usually when my mom was away, you know, to go see her family, you know, back in the home state. Because only my immediate family ever left. Everybody else is still back in Minnesota. But the, you know, so whenever my mother was gone or indisposed for whatever reason, it was my dad's job to cook, at least until my brother and I get older. And, we'd always joke, we'd effectively name it after my dad, you know, call it Dad Rice. Because he was kind of sloppy, despite the fact that the dude is like a very accomplished scientist. He was not necessarily the most attentive. Oops, I don't actually have my clicker script running. Whatever. Probably better to just get a bunch of wizard towers, I think. Well, not at this point. Those are expensive. But so he wasn't the most attentive when it came to cooking. So it was not unusual for him to make dinner or like school lunches for my brother and I and toss in like a cup of rice and a cup of water or less water. And so, you know, have that in a casserole thing in the microwave. I forget exactly how it would work, but you know, you microwave it for 20 minutes and you usually get pretty decent rice out of that. Problem being, you're supposed to put more water than just 1 cup, at least, you know, if you're just doing it in a microwave. If you're using a rice cooker, you don't need nearly as much water. But, so for my dad, he'd put in this combo, and then we'd get effectively a near solid hockey puck of slightly hydrated rice. And that would, you know, that would just be kind of inedible. You could, like, break off a chunk and maybe put some, like, butter and salt on it. But there's no way you're going to be getting anything cool. Or cool, delicious out of it. It was definitely not great, and so we'd have to start over. But, you know, at that point, 20, 30 minutes have already passed, and we're hungry, so... I didn't even remember what we'd eat. Probably cereal. If anything, cereal and maybe yogurt. And so, most of this is just kind of to set the stage to say that, like, growing up, food was not really a thing that I looked forward to. It was, I mean, obviously I did. I was a hungry boy, I always have been. And my mother definitely cooked some great things. You know, she was really good at steak, mashed potatoes, spanakopita, a couple of Swedish recipes, and you know, other things. I'd say my mother was always better at baking, probably. But we weren't particularly adventurous, and when we were, it was bizarre adventurous. Like, specifically, my mother one day had grabbed a bunch of snails from her garden, and she was, you know, she wanted them gone. And so her solution was to make homemade escargot, I guess? But effectively boiled all the snails, and then my family ate them, and I said, heck no, I'm not even touching one of those things. That's disgusting. I want nothing to do with it. And to this day, I actually still kind of think that. Maybe it's totally fine. I don't know. But the idea of just picking a random creature out of the garden, you know, off the plants in the garden, and then just cooking it and eating it, like, that's not too far off of trapping a sparrow that landed in your yard and then eating that. It's like, ugh. Maybe it's fine. I don't know, but some amount of me is just, like, really skeezed out about the idea of doing such a thing. And so it was kind of the same thing with, like, eating out. Obviously, we weren't eating weird roadkill that much. That snail, it was snails. Did we ever do frog legs? I don't think we did. I think snails were really the extent of weird cooking. But for the most part, it was just really basic, hearty American food in my household. And I don't really mind that. That's often, you know, pretty good eats. 50 temples are boosting my CPS. Cool. But yeah, so, eating out, recipes, restaurants, and stuff. So, you know, every once in a while, we'd try and make something interesting. Like, one day we tried making our own pasta, but without, like, a pasta strainer or whatever. Effectively, without any of the tools, we just hand-rolled the noodles and then tried to eat them, and the answer was the noodles were... You know how you can kind of, like, slurp up noodles in a soup? And, you know, it makes a mess, but you can do it. And so that's kind of one of the things that you do with spaghetti or udon noodles or ramen noodles. These, you could not. Like, if you tried sucking on these noodles to, like, suck them into your mouth, they would move at maybe like a millimeter a minute. It was nothing. And so we were all just kind of sitting there puckered over this, like, you know, attempt at homemade spaghetti. Just attempting to just get one noodle from plate to fork to mouth. And suffice to say, like, it was really funny, but it was not great food. I guess similarly, you know, my family never really believed in buying salsa. They'd always home make it, which I think is actually quite valid. A lot of salsa is just, you know, tomato, onion, other things, you know, maybe jalapenos, but not exactly what I would call the most complicated recipe. But oftentimes the salsa was pretty basic and maybe a little heavy on the onions. And so, you know, recently I've been trying a bunch of different locally made salsas, and many of them aren't actually much better than my parents. But every once in a while you run into, like, a mango salsa that's, like, ridiculously good in a fajita. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think if I had ever... I don't think I would have ever thought of that combination if I hadn't bought it from a store or from somewhere else, from a restaurant. And so, for my family, that was kind of the trend. We would stick to the comfortable things. Usually the cheaper things, too. My parents are legendarily cheap when it comes to going out and shopping and buying things. You know, everything has to be on sale, which is fine. Groceries always come from the cheapest grocery store around, which I would actually say is probably less fine, because the quality... I mean, obviously, you know, if you just want to buy your generic big name, brand, label, whatever stuff, it's like, yeah, sure. I'm gonna buy my Cheerios from the cheap store, because why would I spend an extra $2 to get it from the not-so-cheap store? That doesn't make any sense. But, you know, the produce would always come from the cheap places, which was fine, but it was always kind of noticeable that, yeah, that they were getting the not quite as good vegetables, especially. So we almost never got cherries. We would get cherries on occasion, but it was usually because my mother would stop at one of the nicer grocery stores, and they would have cherries there, which, speaking of, I've got cherries downstairs. I should eat those. But so she'd stop in at, you know, those grocery stores and say, hey, yeah, I'm going to, you know, I'm going to pick up a bunch of fancy produce that's actually good, as opposed to cheap produce from a bad store. And so this also transferred to eating out. So whenever we'd eat out specifically, my family generally wouldn't really go anywhere new. So specifically growing up, especially when I was really, really young, you know, ages 4 to 8, we lived in Los Alamos, New Mexico, which, if you've never heard of the place, that wouldn't surprise me too much. But it's a city, town, it's a very small city in the mountains of New Mexico, fairly high enough up that it made my grandfather ill, and they had to go back, you know, back home instead of visiting us for a week, because the altitude was too high and it was making it hard for him to breathe. Which, frankly, cannot blame him for that. You know, that's, you know, he was pretty old at that point and he had a bad heart. But it was pretty remote, which meant there wasn't a whole lot there. I don't even know if there was a Chinese restaurant. I think there was. But all I ever remember eating at was the McDonald's repeatedly and the Pizza Hut occasionally. Like, when Pizza Hut is your special restaurant outing, that it's like, you know, where do you want to go for your birthday? Pizza Hut! Not because, you know, Pizza Hut's your favorite place to go to, but because you've only ever been to Pizza Hut, like, once before, and the idea of a cheesy stuffed crust pizza sounds like magic food. Admittedly, like, when you're 7, of course that's the case. But at the same time, some amount of me is like, but what if, you know, I had access to all of these other food types, you know, that I'd never even heard of before, or even, like, tasted? You know, what would have my preferences growing up been? And now that I'm older, I can tell you safely that it is generally Thai food and Japanese food, and Vietnamese food, and Mediterranean food, and, I mean, American food, yeah, go figure. But the answer is, like, now that I'm older, my food interests have just absolutely broadened out to a ridiculous degree. And it makes me a little disappointed that I didn't broaden my horizons as aggressively when I was younger, because now that I'm older and I have the opportunity to do so, I'm like, boy, I was missing out. You know, 20 years of my life, and the fanciest, the most exotic food I ever had was, like, an Indian buffet in Cambridge. And, like, some of those Indian buffets were good, but they were very, I don't want to call them fly-by-night, but many of them would, like, we go to a good one, and we'd be like, oh man, this is really good. Then we come back, like, maybe 2 or 3 months later, and it'd be gone, replaced by some other restaurant, or another Indian restaurant, but worse, and it's just like, well, this is not what I was hoping for. It wasn't really a big deal, but it's kind of one of those that I don't know. I just wish I had had that variety so much sooner, because for me, what really made me start experiencing other food was going to college. I think that's a topic for another time, just kind of the effects of college on me as a person. But one of the, I guess, more immediate things was that my diet expanded. I did live off of a heavy diet of submarine sandwiches and wraps, because, you know, you got a decent amount of vegetables in them, and fiber and some other things, and so it was kind of easy to control what I was eating, and, you know, wasn't terribly fatty, which helped me at least somewhat keep my weight down up until I got into relationship issues, and then well, that didn't work out as great for me. Turns out getting dumped is not great for your waistline. I think I ate an entire crumble cake in a night because I was depressed. But again, topic for another time. Don't eat crumble cake to that extent. You want to, like, desserts aren't even that good past the first, like, couple of bites. After that, it's just sugar, and you're not really, like, getting a whole lot of fun out of it. You're just like, I am here and eating this because what else am I going to do? And that's just sad. Like, just sad eating is bad for everybody involved. Oh, we want to get that. Another 5%, or another 1% of my CPS. That would get me, what? It's like a 2 million boost. That's actually not really that... It'd be better for me to get multiple alchemy labs or another portal instead of one of those. Especially with portal, damn. But I'd actually say shipments are still a little bit better. I'm gonna kind of invest in the wizard tower. I want to get them up to 50. And then also the factories up to 100. Not that I actually know if any of those are really worth investing in the moment. It is kind of tempting to get the mod that just lets me control things. Oh, right, I haven't looked at the stock market in, like, at all this episode. Well, it would be remiss of me not to potentially buy eggs. Egg. Buy 5 eggs. I guess I'm just gonna collect. What I'd like to do is potentially buy more. What I also potentially need are some brokers. These are all things that I should probably think about for later. Honestly, it might actually be even easier later on. Once I know more about what I'm doing. I don't know. Or maybe once I've ascended. I'm gonna close it. That is actually something I have to think about, at least in the moment. I don't have a whole lot of money to dump into it either. So, with all that said, back to food. So, going to college, yeah, I ate a lot of sandwiches, but I also started to try new things. You know, I met Shell, my partner, and she's like, have you ever had Thai food before? And I was like, no. And so we started having Thai food on the regular. Like, I really like Thai food. Red curry especially. Or red curry and, red curry... Shoot, what's the peanut butter curry? I forget whatever the peanut butter curry is. But that one can also be really good. And obviously pad thai. Like, those three are just so good that, you know, eating just my first plate of one of those was like, you know, holy crap, this is something wildly new for me. Something I've never even conceived of before, and I want more of it. And so that was kind of one of the big revelations for me with, like, food is just like, boy, I've been missing out on this, because even at the college dining facilities, they had like a Tex-Mex, and they had a couple of like Mongolian grill style places. I don't really feel like those broadened my horizons too much. It did a little bit, you know, I wasn't just eating the same thing every day. I really was trying a new and different stuff, and you know, a lot of it was kind of greasy, bad college food, but some of it was really good. And then I got from freshman year to sophomore year. Sophomore year was when I really met Shell and started, you know, eating out with her and spending more time with her. And one thing as part of that was, yeah, the Thai food. We also started eating out at a really good Indian place in Rochester, New York, that was just like second to none as far as Indian food goes. They had just absolutely delicious chicken makhni. Yeah, it was like a butter chicken that had like a nice level of sweetness. Always absolutely knocked me on my ass afterwards because just Indian food is so heavy and often very tomatoey. Either tomatoey or just kind of acidic. But it was delicious, and I kind of missed that place. But, you know, really started to branch out a little bit. And so, especially once she got a car, it was a lot easier for us to just go around the city and actually find new places to try and eat and experiment with. But one of the other ones was that the student alumni union the student alumni union had an eatery in it on the top floor, and every single day they would have a different guest restaurant from the surrounding area come by and have, you know, whatever their food is. And so one day it might be just one of the local Mexican places. Then later it might be, well, I mean, the one that I remember, the one that I actually care about was the Pakistani food. I've never had Pakistani food again after this place. I don't even know if it was necessarily like standard fare Pakistani food or just this place's specialty. But they had this like really good savory chicken that I've never ever seen at another restaurant ever again. And I loved it. I loved eating at that place because it was always weird, you know, to just be like, okay, I want that savory chicken, but then let's try like 2 or 3 other new things from the menu. And that's how it would always go. Just, you know, here here's your selection, try everything. And so suddenly I went from eating classic American food to eating just an absolute smorgasbord of multicultural foods. And I'm drooling now. But it really broadened my horizons, and it really made me kind of realize that, like, yeah, I've been kind of living in this culinary bubble my entire life, and I need to spread out a little bit more. And that's affected my cooking to a decent degree. I think only half, if even, of our recipes that we make in you know, Shell and I make in our household, I would say classify as classic American. Most of the classic American things we make are very much just like I don't know, let's just take some sausages and mix them with beans and then add potatoes on the side. Like, that's it, real quick. But then we'll go out of our way to make, let's say, like well, it's not a beef stroganoff anymore because we cut out the beef, but, you know, a wide variety of different stroganoffs. I got really good at making chili. Which I guess is probably classic American, but it's like pure vegetarian chili. I gotta lay off on the beans, though. Those are not, you know, years ago, I think beans were just kind of like, yeah, it's fine. Those are beans. And now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, beans make me into a vile individual. But this is also kind of transferred to traveling. You know, whenever I visit a new place, I pull up a list of restaurants in the area, and I'm not just looking for the local Carl Jr. Red Robin. You know, I'm not gonna eat at one of those. Maybe I'll eat at one occasionally, but I'll usually regret it. But, you know, say if I visit Seattle or something, I look up and try and find the most unique restaurants. And so, say if we're going to PAX West, I will eat at every single restaurant that, you know, looks novel and interesting. And half the time, like, it's actually super worth it. Cookies oh no! What? I have to not click the UI too much. Well, I win a cookie. I don't know what I clicked there, but I think I was fine. That was not what I was expecting to have happen, but I mean, it did. So, do I want to make temples as twice as effective? It would give me an extra 9. That's not really worth it. So I'm gonna grab that. Unfortunately, Sorcerer's Apprentice, like the thing. Oh, I should have actually saved up for that. Yeah, do we? Do we just save up for frequent flyer? Because that'll double my rocket income. Actually, that seems pretty worthwhile. The Alchemy Lab would also be equally worthwhile, but it's a little bit more expensive. Sun Festival is just a little too pricey for me at the moment. I will just wait. I should have invested in that, but at least we got Wizard Towers up to 50. I'll take it. Anyway, so yeah, whenever I go to a new place, I'm just trying a bunch of different things. And usually after a couple months or weeks there or days there, you know, I might fall into a habit. But say when we were in Kansas, yeah, trying all the different Thai foods or finding like the unique sushi place that's really, really good. Or trying every single sushi place and finding the one that's like really good. Unfortunately, I really like belt sushi, and that's not super feasible during the pandemic, so I've had to cut that out entirely. And honestly, I think there's kind of a lasting residual guilt whenever I eat seafood, because it's just like, oh, right. Seafood is not very sustainably harvested, and it's usually pretty bad for the environment in general. So I've been kind of leery on the idea of eating a whole lot of seafood nowadays. I'll do it very sparingly, but, you know, I will try and stay away from eating sushi on a monthly basis, and I definitely won't, like, buy a whole lot of fish. If I can avoid it, obviously more sustainable farming practices. If you can do, like, aquaculture gardens, and then, you know, somewhat sustainably fish in those areas, like, that could work. But until the world gets better at fishing, I'm always going to be kind of iffy on that. Same thing with meat, actually. And I realize that whenever meats and vegetarianism and stuff like that, like, when when you talk about cutting meat out of your diet, you always get a number of people that always say, like, you know, how dare you suggest I go vegetarian? And it's like, I really truly feel like it's a personal choice, but I also feel like you kind of need to encourage the world to take a look at eating meat in general and be like, maybe we should cut that out just a little bit, because meat isn't really that good for people to begin with. It's calorie dense, nutrient rich, and so, like, yeah, you can get a lot of what you need out of meat. But there's also a lot of stuff that you don't really want that's in meat, and it's like, it's generally bad for your body in a way that vegetables are not. And so it's like, it's fine sparingly, you know, just maybe a little bit of meat here and there, or, you know, a steak once a week. That's kind of admissible, but when it becomes like a steak every couple of days, and like chicken in every meal, and burgers and all that stuff, you know, that starts to become actually kind of problematic, not only for people's health, but also kind of on an environmental thing. I realize like half of these podcasts are always just going to be me regurgitating somewhat of my ethos back out onto the internet in hopes of somebody listening. But so for me, for ages, you know, the idea of going vegetarian was just kind of unthinkable. Why would I go vegetarian? You know, I don't eat a whole lot of meat, but, you know, I like my barbecue. I buy 15 pounds of pork once a month to just throw in the slow cooker and have just like a ton of shredded pork, and it was delicious. Mostly, and then it started getting a little grosser because the quality went down. But then, and, you know, I was even somewhat, I'm not going to say derisive of my little brother being vegetarian, because he was vegetarian for most of college, almost kind of on a dare, because one of his friends kind of challenged him to do so, and so yeah, he went vegetarian for 4 years. And I was kind of like, yeah, but why would you do that? And then the more I read about, like, the meat industry, I'm like, oh gosh, they treat the animals and their employees terribly, especially in, like, COVID era. But also, you know, in terms of just, like, dumping, you know, wastewater and cow waste, you know, just into the Gulf of Mexico, and that's not great. And just a bunch of things kind of centered around that industry, comboed with the effects of the food, the health issues, and some other things. And so, you know, after a certain point of looking at those articles, reading about these things, watching whatever documentaries that really do kind of do the shock and horror of, like, oh gosh, you know, greenhouse gases from the meat industry are terrible. And the answer is actually yes, it is. But, you know, there's only so much of that I think I could take before I eventually said, like, yeah, actually, no, this is something that I care enough about that I think I will start going cold turkey on meat. And so we started reducing it. And then we went to Disneyland. And that's, I realize is going to sound kind of weird, but at Disneyland they had, in the Star Wars section, they had something called a Ronto wrap. And they had the meat version, and then also the fake meat version, which I think had Beyond Beef in it. And it was like we kind of made our own version that was like non-lettuce, kind of a homemade sauce that Shell knows how to make. And Beyond Beef, just, you know, cooked up in a skillet with maybe some spices, and then just kind of wrapped together, and it was delicious. Like, it was just absolutely some of the best food I'd had in a long time. In terms of, like, not necessarily like the food was transcendental, but it was a flavor that I had never even come close to eating before. And so it was like, holy shit, you know, not only is this some of the best food I've had in forever, you know, pretty much ever since Croatia. Obviously had other good food, but it was like, you can only have so many different types of pad thai before it all starts tasting the same. Yeah, you can tell which one's better, but it's not like you're gonna have a new pad thai and be like, whoa, this has blown my mind, unless they've done something incredibly different. And so the Ronto wrap was this, where it was just like, this is something incredibly cool, that I hadn't even, like, really conceived of. I'd mostly been waiting for lab-grown meat to become my ethical meat solution, but all of a sudden I've eaten this burger that really does kind of seem like, oh, or not burger, this wrap that's like, oh yeah, this is delicious. And I didn't even realize that it wasn't meat. And then, was it later that night, or maybe it was the next day, we were at just kind of American burger joint. I don't remember why we'd gone there specifically, but they had an Impossible Burger, and it was just a standard burger, cheese, ketchup, you know, maybe tomato and lettuce and some other things, plus fries and ketchup, just the generic. But no, no beef as part of it. And it was delicious. It was actually one of the better burgers I'd ever had. Live in America, you eat burgers constantly. Probably. Maybe not necessarily for everybody, but for me, burgers were just very much part of my diet. And still are. But eating that Impossible Burger was like, oh, shoot. I don't need to eat beef anymore. I don't need to. Obviously, I haven't had a steak in, like, a couple of years, and that's a bit of a downer. Sometimes I will... I guess, not quite true. I haven't had a beef steak in a while. I will sometimes go for a buffalo steak, because those are slightly more, like, environmentally conscious, and also just way tastier. And so sometimes I will go out of my way for that kind of thing, but it's super rarely. Otherwise, it's just, yeah, fake meat all the way. So... We like to do kind of food tourism at all of these grocery stores where we go in and we're just like, oh man, look at this. They've got buffalo chicken wings, but it's fake chicken, or the mindful chicken, but it's not, it's not chicken. I don't even know what's in it necessarily. It's a lot of like soy or pea protein. And yeah, now that I've started eating these things, I can tell you straight up that like I haven't even noticed the switch. And it's been kind of nice because previously, there's only so much you can do with chicken, and whenever you go to the grocery store, you look at the meat aisle, and it's always the same, couple of companies, and generally the same handling of them, and almost nothing ever changes in the meat aisle. But then you go over to the like new agey food section, and it is more expensive, and that's the one thing that sucks a little bit, but that's because there's less of a subsidy. Meat subsidies are pretty hefty. Same thing with milk. And that, I think I sat down and did the math at one point, and it's like, I think beef should be 3 to 4 times as expensive as it is, if it wasn't for the various things that we're subsidizing, or, just passing off the price, in terms of, like, transportation costs and, carbon footprint, which blew my mind, the idea of steak being $20 a dollar. Like, sure, if it's a really fancy steak, but, like, the cheap stuff, I wouldn't pay $20 for that, but that's kind of what it's worth. We just, have socialized the cost of beef, so it's not as ridiculously expensive. Which I can kind of understand. You have to make things readily available to, lower income people, and if you just unilaterally start raising the prices of food, you're going to actually run into a lot of people switching over to, food stamp systems or way unhealthier diets, and so it's better to find healthy alternatives and slowly wean us off of the things that we shouldn't be eating and are actually bad for us. Ish. But yeah, so going to the grocery store, the various grocery stores around here, going into the kind of the eco-conscious sections, and then just being, it's like, I don't know. I don't want to call it like Disneyland for food, but I can't break that association because that's where this started. But every time we go to a grocery store, it's just like, yeah, what new weird thing do they have that we've never seen before? And so one of the things for me recently has been ice cream, actually. Have you ever had avocado ice cream before? Have you ever had cashew ice cream before? Have you ever had, gosh, I'm trying to remember all of the other ones. But so we specifically have 2 pints of ice cream downstairs that we just picked up today from, I think it's called Cotto. And it's ice cream, but it's way healthier than, regular dairy ice cream. And it's not as sweet, which I can see, some people taking umbrage with because, ice cream being sweet is delicious. But at the same time, for me, I don't really like overly sweet things. I like chocolate on the darker side. I like most of my food on the more savory side. If I need something sweet, occasionally I'll go for something sweet. But usually I prefer less sweet, so I feel less guilty about it and don't feel like I immediately need to go brush my teeth, which I think is kind of important because I like having clean teeth. But so yeah, going to grocery stores nowadays, especially for ice cream, it's just like, what new wacky wacky ice cream flavors and combinations made from non-dairy stuff can I find? And the answer is I keep finding, like, really good stuff. So, you know, Kato, and then there's Brave Robot, which I don't actually remember what it's made out of. I think it was pea protein or maybe something else, which was some of the best ice cream I've ever had, but then I looked at the health information, it was like 50% worse than regular ice cream, and it's just like, this is a price that I will pay once in a blue moon, because that is so good, but also so not good for me. And I don't know, I like it. I love the idea of finding all these different foods and things to try. And it just makes life kind of exciting. It's one of my, like, current main comforts, despite the fact that, yeah, it's not healthy for me. But going back to, you know, the idea of being in lockdown and not really having a whole lot going on in my life in this whole midlife crisis that I seem to be just locked into. Having tons of different foods popping up constantly in, you know, the various grocery stores around me, and I've got, like, 5 different ones with wildly different selections from each other. It's actually kind of nice to just be like, okay, let's go to this grocery store today and just buy a smorgasbord of weird new things. So we had papaya. Never had fresh papaya before, and let me tell you, it tastes garbage. At least by my merits. We did not handle it at all well, and didn't really know what to do with it, but it's like, yeah, let's buy a papaya, let's try this. Oh, it's bad. Alright, cool. I tried to make it into a smoothie, and let me tell you, I had to chew that smoothie for the first cup's worth, and then I was like, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna push this through a strainer, see how that turns out. And the answer was, well, the weird papaya smoothie juice was not, it didn't taste great, but at least I didn't have to chew it. I don't know. It was an interesting adventure all the same. At some point, I will take you guys on the journey of what it's like for me to try and make bread, which is almost always a disaster. But we'll have to work on that. We'll have to talk about that later. Eventually, I want to do a cooking show, but I need a bigger kitchen, because my current kitchen is not conducive to a camera setup. You guys would just mostly be looking at my back, and it would not be great. So, anyway, with all of that, I hope you guys enjoyed my food-based ramblings. I am hungry now, and maybe, hopefully, you are too. And I will see you guys on the next episode of CookieCast. At some point, we'll talk about baking.